everywhere. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. Leave home in the sunshine, dance through a meadow, or sit by a stream and just be. The lilt of the water will gather your worries and carry them down to the sea. The lilt of the water will gather your worries and carry them down to the sea. Men hunger for freedom, but don't see their dungeon is only the thought that they're bound. Desires are their shackles, the hope that tomorrow the doorway to joy will be found. Desires are their shackles, the hope that tomorrow the doorway to joy will be found. There's joy all around us, why wait till tomorrow? We've only this moment to live. The heaven within us is ours for the finding, a freedom no riches can give. The heaven within us is ours for the finding, a freedom no riches can give. There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains, and melody sings everywhere. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air.
Our reading is taken from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This is week 11. Reason versus intuition. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus, when addressing his critics, appealed to reason and common sense. In his training of the disciples, however, he, like all great masters, encouraged in them the development of a higher faculty, soul intuition. For it is only by intuition that spiritual perceptions are achieved. In chapter 16 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, we find Jesus drawing on the intuition of his disciples by asking them who they thought he was in reality. They immediately understood that what he wanted from them was a subtle answer, not some obvious reply based on his nationality, sex, and the like. Peter it was, at last, who understood and answered the question on its intended level, the spiritual. "Thou art the Christ," he said, "the Son of the living God." And Jesus turned to him, saying, "Blessed art thou, Simon, son of Jonah, for not by human nature was this truth revealed to thee, but by my heavenly Father. And I tell thee also, thou art Peter, which is to say, a rock. And upon this rock will I build my church, and never will the powers of darkness overwhelm it." Jesus was pleased with his disciple for relating to the question on its deepest level. Reason could not have given Peter that answer. The answer came through the faculty of soul intuition, and proved him thereby to be a spiritually advanced disciple. It was his intuitive perception, that insight which cannot be shaken by tempests of reasonable doubt, that Jesus praised in referring to him as a rock. The church he referred to next was the edifice of cosmic consciousness. Any outer church institution would have to depend, as in fact the Christian churches have always done, on the level of understanding of its individual leaders and members. Peter's intuitive perceptions could never have been passed on to an outward succession of prelates. Clarity comes by direct soul perception. Confusion results from excessive dependence on reason as the guide to understanding. As the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, when your intellect, at present confused by the diversity of teaching in the scriptures, becomes steadfast in the ecstasy of deep meditation, then you will achieve final union with God. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Top of the morning to you. And especially to the Irish among you on this glorious St. Patrick's Day. Where's Bill Grady when you need him? Can you hear me all right? Testing, 1, 2, 3. It puts me in mind of a card that I saw with a photograph of 3 old guys. Now, I can say old guys. I don't have to say senior citizens or honored citizens. And the reason that I can is that I now qualify as one. So, anyway, there's 3 old guys walking along the beach. And the first one says, "It's windy today." And the second one says, "No, it's Thursday." And the third one says, "So am I, let's have a beer." And I have the feeling that far too many of our communications go something like that. Anyway, we're talking about reason versus intuition today. One of my first experiences of intuition came when I knew I was going to come out to Ananda. And I was in Vermont, and Ananda was in California. And I didn't have any money. But I knew I was going to come out here, and so I figured I better get a job. And I was not just in Vermont, but in South Lincoln, Vermont, which is a far cry from a tiny town called Bristol, which is a far cry from a slightly bigger town called Middlebury. So I drove the distance to Middlebury, which was the nearest unemployment office. And as I was driving to the unemployment office, it just came to me, that's not where you're going to find a job. And I drove right on by it and turned around and went back to South Lincoln. And I had, at that point, had some exposure to the teaching, so I sort of had an idea about some of these things. And it came to me that, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for walks, I'm going to chop wood, I'm going to do everything I can, but with the conscious intention of drawing the means to get out to Ananda. And I didn't know how it was going to work, and I didn't even know where that idea came from. It came from somewhere within me, and that's part of what I was going to talk about today. It seems to me, in thinking about it, there were three ways that intuition can work. One is this something that comes from inside of you, and you don't even know necessarily where it comes from. For me, because I tend to be mentally oriented and skeptical to the point of cynical, it often has to kind of come through a side door. And that's what happened when I drove by the unemployment office, and that was what came to me when I came back home. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this. It's like a spiritual practice, right? Affirmations. So I would go for walks, and all the while, I was putting out the energy with the conscious intent of drawing the means to come to Ananda. And after 4 or 5 days of this, I took a different road coming back home than I had been taking. And I walked right by a house being built that was across the meadow from the little tiny cabin I was staying in. And there were some guys there, and I said, hey, do you need any help? And they said, yeah, well, the contractor's going to be here tomorrow. Why don't you come back and see? And sure enough, I came back, and there was the work right there on the other side of the meadow from me. And I had just experienced that, and I didn't know how, but I was amazed at how that worked. You don't know, well, reason versus intuition. And the problem with reason is that it tends to get tripped up over itself. Reason follows feeling. And feeling is generally a product of the ego. So it's not a very reliable source of it. There's a line in the peace treaty from Kovar where he says, words can be made to serve an infinity of ends. In other words, you can talk yourself into almost anything if that's where your desires are drawing you. You can rationalize it, you can work it out, you can figure it out. Another experience that I had was when I was building a house at Ananda, and I was up on a roof with 2 other contractors. Now, these are young contractors. Young contractors have a tendency to know everything and be the only ones who have it right. So you put 3 of them together and you've got trouble right there. And we were up there arguing about the right way to do a roof and getting nowhere with it. And one of our helpers, a laborer, was walking by with a wheelbarrow, right? And he shouted up, he said, why don't you just do something or other? You know, I don't remember exactly what he said. And it stopped us all cold. And we looked at each other. And it was kind of as though all our reasoning and figuring out canceled each other out. Because we knew he was right. And he didn't know anything about construction compared to us, but we knew intuitively that he was speaking the truth. I had another experience with back in Vermont where my next door neighbor was a couple in a farmhouse up in the mountains of Vermont and across the fields. And she was very into Guru Maharaji, who was described as he was 15 years old, and he was described as a perfect master. And I kind of raised an eyebrow on that, but I could see that she was getting something out of it. There was no question about that. So I went with the 2 of them to one of these gatherings, and this is one of those things where they spray colored water on people and they take the Indian traditions and they apply them to a Western mentality with mixed results. And anyway, he was explaining about perfect master and what that meant, and he likened it to, like if you've got an English master or a mathematics master, they're teaching you English or they're teaching you mathematics, right? So that's what he's teaching us about how to be perfect. And I'm going, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me, but that cynical part of me was saying, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And so, came back home, and a few days later, her husband was there too. And he was an artist, he was a photographer, but most of all, he was a Jew. That was his cultural identification. And this Hindu stuff didn't particularly resonate with him. But he went along with it because, his wife was into it, and hey, what's the harm? So he comes walking across this field to my place. Now, I hadn't had any deep conversations about him, about spiritual matters or anything like this. And he's got a book in his hand. And he comes in and he hands me the book. He says, here, I thought you might be interested in this. Well, guess what the book was? Autobiography of a Yogi. So he had, for some reason, well, I know where it came from. He had the intuition that I might be interested in this book, and he took it off the shelf and brought it over to me. And so we go, now, speaking of Jewish, we've been doing this, what's it called? The generation thing, the genetic thing? 23andMe, right? And finding out my kids have been into it, everybody's into it, finding all these connections. So we come to find out as we're going along that Pavani, excuse me, by the way, I'm Vajra. She told me, don't forget to introduce everybody. Okay, that's the reasoning override, I think. I'm Vajra. This is Pavani. We're joined today by Mari and Lorna and all of you. Thank you for coming. Anyway, we found out through this genetic testing that you are what?
50% Ashkenazi Jew.
50% Ashkenazi Jew. So here am I, a Minnesota Lutheran, right? From the heartland of Protestantism, Garrison Keillor country. And here I am, I'm married to a nice Jewish girl. Who knew? Anyway, it was this Jewish neighbor of mine that had the intuition to turn me on to Yogananda and the autobiography of Yogi. And when I opened that book, it took me all the way to page 2 before I realized this guy knows what he's talking about. This is spiritual teachings from the source, from the truth. He understands it. And that wasn't because he had all these pretty highfalutin words put together, the concomitant verities and all that. No, it's because I knew inside that he was speaking the truth. So it can come from just inside, from some sort, that's that still calm voice within, from some little bypass that gets around your logical mind that has a tendency to trip you up. It can come from somebody else. I had a dear friend at the village Master's Market, and I was outside wandering around. Where did I put my sunglasses? I don't know. You know where my sunglasses were? They were up there, right? So I can't find I go back in the market, and she's at the cashier, at the cash register, and I walked up to her, and I said, have you seen my sunglasses? Did anybody turn any sunglasses in or something like that? Now, I'm a space case, right? I got this, but she's taken it to a whole new level because she's looking right at me. And she's saying, no, I haven't seen your sunglasses. Nobody's turned any sunglasses in. Now, this same person, sometime later, I was in a conversation with her about something or other, I don't know, but at one point in that conversation, the experience I had was like somebody tapping me on the shoulder and saying, this is Divine Mother speaking to you directly. And I just had that clarity. And she was saying something that was significant information for me. This space case was being a perfect channel for Divine Mother's words straight to me. So when you're talking to people, no matter, Swami would do this, no matter who it was, no matter what other people might think of them, you listen. Because they might be the one who's got that one piece of information that you need, especially. The other way it can come to you is through the guru, through a spiritual teacher, a spiritual counselor, those you look to for spiritual guidance. Very often, the channels for that intuition, for that inner knowing that you need to hear. When Pavani and I were first going through to getting together, we were going through some very turbulent times when relation karma flying all over the place, this, that, and the other, process of divorce. It was extremely challenging, and I was talking to Jyotish and Devi about it, and Jyotish said, you know, if it were my way, I'd just have you all just take a year apart. And I proceeded to give him a lengthy, explanation of why that was impossible, very well thought out and detailed, and he didn't say anything. Davey said, you might want to think about moving to Sacramento. But Jyotish didn't say anything. And I was going through this turmoil about it. And a couple of days, 2-3 days of that, I called him back and I said, Jyotish, I'm just trying to figure out what it is that's being asked of me. Now, that's an important part of it. Because when we're in the moment and somebody asks something of us that we don't want to hear, that's when the reason faculty kicks in, and we give them all the reasons why it can't be so, why it has to be different. But when, out of desperation, you say, okay, Divine Mother, I don't know anymore. You got to help me out here. That's when we open ourselves to the real guidance. That's where the intuition comes in. So I'm talking to Jyotish on the phone saying, I just want to know what's being asked of me. And he said, well, we're on our way out the door, but I got just a minute here. And he paused for a moment. And in that pause, I could hear clear as a bell. Now, I don't hear voices. I don't see visions. I don't know anything. But it's just that inner knowing. This is Divine Mother speaking to you. You better pay attention. And he explained to me. And every word that he said made so much sense that I knew it was the truth. I knew it was what I had to do, no matter how much I didn't like it, no matter how much I didn't want to have to do it. And following that intuitive guidance channeled through Jyotish gave us the foundation for our relationship that we could build on. So pay attention to these things. Now, what happens when you don't get that clear as a bell knowing? When you don't know and you're lost and your mind is telling you this and your feelings are unclear, you don't know if it's intuition or just feeling because, it gets confusing at times. Swami tells us a story of when he was planning to take a trip to India. And all set to go, he had the money, he was ready to go, and his car broke down. And there he was, and he said, Divine Mother, what do you want me to do? I really want to go to India, but my car broke down. I'm going to need a car when I come back from India. Now, this is a place where you got to watch it because it's really easy if we can put a spiritual label on something to say, oh, well, go to India. I mean, fixing a car versus going to India? Come on. But he wasn't feeling the clarity. He wasn't hearing that still, small voice within. He didn't know. So what did he do? He said, well, common sense. I'm going to need a car. Divine Mother, I got to get a car. If you really want me to go to India, you're going to have to figure out a way because I can't just walk off and abandon all my responsibilities. That doesn't work. So he got his car fixed or got another car. Within a matter of days, he received an envelope from somebody with a little note inside. Use this as Divine Mother wishes. And it was the money that he needed to go to India. So, I got one other story for you, which is the fallback. When it doesn't work out anyway, you do your best, and you blow it. You use what you thought was your intuition, and it didn't turn out that way. It's okay to blow it. God will get you there. The right effort now will move you forward. Everything in future will improve if you make the right effort now. Swami tells a story of being out shopping and coming across this little tape recorder back in the day when they had tape recorders. I think all of you know what tape recorders are, for MP3s and whatever is currently taking the place of that. And he said, oh, well, that would be useful. I can, record my thoughts for later use. So the owner of the shop demonstrated for him how to make it work and all that. And he thought, great. And he was going to a concert that night, and so he brought the tape recorder along and thought it'd be cool to, record some of the concert, and then I can listen to it later. So he's there in the concert in between movements, right? And he says, oh, this would be a good time to try out the tape recorder. So the conductor is raising his wand to start the orchestra, and Swami hits the switch to turn on the tape recorder. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Shattering the stillness of the moment. The conductor whirls around, 1,000 eyes are riveted on Swami. And inwardly, he's enjoying every moment of it. What a great story this is going to be. So not to worry if it doesn't turn out the way you thought. You'll get there by and by.